Sometimes the smallest sound in the stillest hour carries the weight of an entire life unraveling. It was nearly midnight when Linda Brennan threaded the last strand of cotton through her needle. The living room was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator down the hall and the faint tick of the grandfather clock her father had left her. Daniel's jacket lay across her lap, worn at the cuffs and split at the seam near the elbow. He was 22 now, a senior at the university, but Linda still found herself patching his clothes the way she had when he was a boy tearing through Little League diamonds. Some habits were less about necessity and more about love's persistence. She pinched the fabric, pushed the needle through, and reminded herself that Daniel had a job interview next week. He wanted to look sharp. She wanted him to feel cared for. There was something almost holy about repairing a garment for your child, as if with every stitch you were binding the brokenness of the world, one loose thread at a time. That was when the phone lit up. It rested on the coffee table, face down, buzzing once against the wood. At first, Linda didn't move. Midnight calls rarely brought good news, and she had grown skilled at waiting things out. But the vibration came again, then a third time. With a sigh, she set down her needle and reached for it. The number was unfamiliar. The message was short. Michael is with me. If you keep holding on, you'll only make the children suffer. Linda stared at the screen, her breath held so tightly in her chest she felt dizzy. Her husband's name in someone else's mouth. The certainty of possession, with me. The cruelty of the warning, make the children suffer. The jacket slid from her lap onto the carpet. Linda Brennan was 56 years old, with hair that had begun to silver at the temples and eyes the color of winter rain. For 3 decades, she had been the anchor of a household that leaned too heavily on her patience. Her husband Michael, once the ambitious salesman who had swept her off her feet in college, had grown restless with middle age. She had noticed the changes, the sudden late nights, the cologne not meant for her, the credit card receipts folded too carefully into his wallet. But noticing and acknowledging are two different acts. And Linda, for the sake of her children, had chosen the quieter one. This message, though, stripped her of that choice. It was an intrusion into the sanctuary of her denial, delivered not in whispers or suspicions, but in black letters glowing against a white screen. She could have screamed. She could have hurled the phone against the wall or called Emily, her 30-year-old daughter who argued cases in courtrooms but still phoned her mother every Sunday to ask about chicken soup recipes. She could have driven to wherever Michael was, demanded an explanation, created a scene. But Linda did none of that. Instead, she picked up the jacket again. Her hands trembled as she tried to thread the needle, and the cotton slipped through her fingers. Finally, she laid it across the armrest and folded her palms together in her lap. Her silence was not acceptance. It was armor. You see, betrayal is not always about the act itself. It is about the fracture it forces into the stories we tell our children. For years, Linda had stitched a picture of their father as reliable, hard-working, devoted. Not perfect, but good. And children, whether they are 8 or 28, cling to these pictures. They anchor their own lives upon them. What would happen when those anchors gave way? The message had not just attacked her marriage. It had threatened the very ground beneath Emily and Daniel's feet. And so, Linda did what she had done her entire life. She bore the weight alone. At 12:15 a.m., she rose from the couch. She walked to the window overlooking Maple Avenue, where the streetlight bathed the empty road in an amber glow. Across the way, the Jeffersons' house was dark except for the flicker of a television. Next door, Christmas lights still clung stubbornly to the porch rail, even though January was nearly over. The world carried on, unaware that in one small living room, a woman had just learned the truth of her life. Linda pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She thought about Emily, who had sacrificed friendships and weekends to put herself through law school, who still called her mama when she was sick. She thought about Daniel, the dreamer with notebooks full of sketches who wanted to design buildings that made people feel at home. She thought about how much they believed in their father, how Daniel wore Michael's old wristwatch to exams because he said it made him lucky. If they knew, Linda's eyes closed. Her breath fogged the glass. The pain was not only in the betrayal, it was in the knowledge that a single confession could unravel the fragile quilt she had spent years sewing. Family, after all, is nothing more than the stories we agree to believe about one another. But what happens when one person refuses to keep telling the same story? The phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael's number. Linda didn't answer. She watched it glow on the table, ringing into the silence until it faded away. At 12:30 a.m., she gathered Daniel's jacket, folded it neatly, and set it by the door. The needle still clung to the last thread, half pulled through the seam. She hadn't finished her repair. She understood, though, that not everything broken can be mended in one night. There is a lesson in moments like these, though most of us only see it in hindsight. Sometimes the smallest detail, the faint buzz of a phone, the sentence from a stranger, can collapse the walls we thought indestructible. Linda would carry that truth with her from this night forward. And though the world outside remained unchanged, inside her, the architecture of her life had shifted forever. She turned off the light, climbed the stairs to her bedroom, and lay awake until dawn. The message remained on her phone, waiting, glowing faintly in the dark. Linda rose before the sun, as she always did. The house was quiet, save for the soft breathing of Daniel down the hall and the muted rumble of a truck on Maple Avenue. She brewed the coffee in the French press, measured carefully as though precision in beans and water could give her some small control over the day ahead. She didn't touch her phone. The message still waited there, like a bruise that deepens in color each time you look at it. By 7, Michael's car pulled into the driveway. Linda heard the slam of the door, the heavy tread of his shoes on the porch. He entered with the performance of a man who had been working late. Tie loosened, jacket slung over one shoulder, cologne still clinging to him in a way that felt foreign in their home. "You're up early," he said, pressing a quick kiss to her temple before reaching for a mug. His lips barely grazed her skin, like a man kissing a stranger out of politeness. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured. He didn't ask why. Instead, he poured coffee, scrolled through his phone with one hand, and muttered about a client dinner that had run late. Linda watched him, her face unreadable, and realized she had rehearsed this scene a dozen times before. It had played out with variations: a dinner, a meeting, an emergency. Always the reason was work, and always she had chosen to accept it. But now, after the midnight message, every detail stood under a harsher light. The crease in his shirt, too sharp for someone who had spent the night in an office. The faint shimmer of a woman's perfume not her own. Even the way he avoided her eyes, focusing instead on the swirl of cream dissolving in his cup. Emily arrived that evening for dinner. Her voice filled the kitchen the way it always did, warm, determined, slightly impatient. She was a lawyer by trade, but at home, she was still the girl who used to argue about curfews and chores. Only now her arguments carried citations and evidence. "Dad, you've been working a lot," she said, spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate. "You're going to burn out." Michael chuckled, brushing it off. "That's the job, sweetheart." Linda forced a smile and passed the green beans. She noticed how Emily's eyes flickered to her father's phone each time it buzzed on the table, how Michael would glance at it, then flip it face down as if that erased its presence. Emily didn't say more, but Linda caught the tension in her daughter's jaw. Daniel, ever the dreamer, was oblivious. He launched into a story about a design project at school, how he and his classmates were drafting plans for a community center. His eyes shone, and Linda laughed at the right moments, encouraging him, proud of the way his ideas spilled over like a rushing river. Michael nodded occasionally, but his attention strayed to the glow of his phone. Linda saw it clearly, the disconnect between a father pretending to listen and a son desperate to be heard. She wanted to reach across the table and yank the device from his hands, to demand he see the boy who still wore his watch like a talisman, but she didn't. She carved her chicken, passed the gravy, swallowed her silence. After dinner, when Emily helped clear the plates, she leaned close to her mother. "Mom, is everything okay with you too?" she asked quietly. Linda's instinct was immediate: protect, deflect, preserve the image. "Of course, he's just busy." Emily studied her, as though searching for cracks in a mask. But then she nodded, kissed her mother's cheek, and let it go. Later that night, when the dishes were washed and Daniel had retreated upstairs, Linda sat alone in the living room. Michael was in the shower, steam curling beneath the bathroom door. She noticed how long he stayed there, how his shadow shifted behind the frosted glass. She had convinced herself before that maybe showers helped him unwind. But tonight it looked like a man hiding. She remembered the first time she had felt something was off. It was months earlier, at a company picnic by Green Lake. The sun was bright and families sprawled on blankets, children running through sprinklers. Michael had insisted they attend, unusual for him since he often complained about such events. That day she'd met Rebecca for the first time. The introduction was polite, a handshake, a too bright smile. Rebecca's laugh was pitched just slightly too high when Michael told a story about landing a client. And when her hand lingered on his arm, Linda felt a drop of ice water slide down her spine. Later, during a volleyball game, she caught them exchanging a look. Not a casual glance, but something heavier, weighted with secrets. Michael missed the ball because of it, earning good-natured laughter from colleagues. Linda had laughed too, though her stomach turned. She had chosen to bury that feeling, to fold it neatly, like an unpleasant letter, and shove it into the back of a drawer in her mind. For the children's sake, for her own fragile peace. Now, in the quiet of her living room, the drawer had been forced open. Michael emerged from the shower smelling of the same sharp cologne. He kissed her cheek again, another half-touch, and muttered something about needing to finish a report. He retreated to his study, closing the door behind him. Linda sat for a long time, staring at the jacket she still hadn't finished mending. The thread dangled from the seam, waiting for her hand to guide it through. She thought about how many little tears she had sown over the years. Knees ripped on playgrounds, elbows worn from leaning on desks, hems frayed from growth spurts. She had always believed she could fix what was torn, that love and patience could restore what life had worn thin. But this was different. This was not fabric, this was trust. And trust, once torn, rarely holds the same when stitched back together. She picked up the needle, tried to thread it again, but her eyes blurred. The cotton slipped once more, refusing to be tamed. Linda set it down and pressed her palms to her face. In the hush of that moment, she understood something she had been running from. She had not only ignored the signs, she had chosen not to see them, because seeing would mean acknowledging, and acknowledging would mean change. And Linda Brennan, mother first, wife second, had been terrified of what change would do to her children. Yet now, with each buzz of Michael's phone and each memory replaying like a scene she had overlooked, she realized the change was no longer optional. It was already here, seeping through the cracks she had tried to cover with silence. The midnight message had not been the beginning. It was only the final confirmation of a truth that had been sitting beside her for months. Linda rose, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs. Daniel's door was ajar. She paused, looking at him sprawled on his bed. Sketches scattered across the floor. His hair fell into his eyes, and his chest rose and fell with the even breath of someone unburdened. She closed his door softly, leaning her forehead against the wood for a moment. Her children were still dreaming, unaware. She intended to keep it that way for now, but she knew, with a heaviness in her chest, that her silence would not protect them forever. The morning after Emily's visit, Linda slipped into her work shoes before the sun had broken through the winter clouds. The shoes were plain, leather worn at the heels, soles softened by years of standing. She had bought them on sale at a department store more than a decade ago, promising herself they would last only until times were better. Times, however, had never quite improved enough to replace them. She carried her sewing kit into the small shop 2 blocks from the bus stop, where she worked a second shift stitching hems and repairing zippers. Most people assumed Linda had retired from her sewing work once the children were grown. Few knew she still spent late hours in the back room of Marjorie's alterations, the hum of the machines her steady companion. Her husband's paycheck was supposed to cover the bills, and it did on paper. But there were always missing pieces, unexplained withdrawals, investments that never returned. When Michael claimed it was just business, Linda quietly filled the gaps. Tuition for Daniel, car insurance for Emily when she was starting out, even the monthly groceries at times. She never told the children how much of it came from her, how many nights she stayed at the shop after closing to finish someone else's prom dress or a suit for a wedding. That morning, as she bent over a pile of denim to be patched, her fingers ached. Age had stiffened her joints, and the cold didn't help. Yet she pushed the needle through, each stitch a reminder that a mother's body often bore the quiet record of sacrifice. The sore knees from kneeling to clean floors, the bent shoulders from carrying too many loads of laundry, the stiff fingers from sewing the world back together for her children. Around 9, she paused for tea. Marjorie, the owner, sat beside her, sipping from a thermos. She had known Linda for years and recognized the weariness around her eyes. "You're working too hard," Marjorie said gently. Linda smiled faintly. "Daniel's last semester isn't going to pay for itself. Shouldn't Michael be covering that?" Linda's smile faltered. She set down her cup. "He has expenses." Marjorie raised a brow but said nothing more. Some truths were too raw to name out loud. That evening, Linda returned home to find Daniel at the kitchen table, textbooks and sketch pads spread out like an artist's battlefield. His hair was messy, a pencil tucked behind his ear, his hands smudged with graphite. "Hey, Mom," he said, barely glancing up. "Do we have any more coffee?" She opened the cabinet, pulling down the tin. "You'll keep yourself awake all night with this habit." "I've got to. We're presenting the final draft tomorrow." She poured the grounds, added water, and watched the machine sputter to life. For a moment, she simply observed him, her boy, nearly a man, shoulders broader now, his face shadowed with the beginnings of adulthood. She remembered him at 5, falling asleep over his crayons, whispering dreams of building castles. Now he was building those dreams for real. "Daniel," she said softly, "don't push yourself so hard, you'll make yourself sick." He grinned, looking up finally. "That's rich coming from you." The words stung in their accuracy. She was the one running herself thin, stitching until midnight, patching holes no one else admitted existed. But she didn't argue. She only set the mug before him, ruffling his hair the way she had when he was a boy. Later, when Michael came home, he tossed his jacket on the couch and muttered something about a meeting that had run late. His eyes darted briefly to Daniel's scattered notebooks, then to Linda's weary face. "You didn't need to work today, did you?" he asked casually, pouring himself a drink. Linda froze for a moment. "I had some orders to finish." Michael shrugged. "Well, don't wear yourself out. We've got Emily's student loans to help with soon." The irony almost made her laugh. She wanted to tell him she had already been helping with those, slipping Emily envelopes when she visited, whispering not to tell her father. But Linda only nodded, pressing her lips together. That night, she lay awake listening to Michael's even breathing beside her. Her eyes traced the ceiling in the darkness, and she thought about the balance she was forever maintaining, protecting Daniel's education, supporting Emily's independence, shielding both of them from the cracks in their father's life. She realized her love for her children had become both shield and shackle. Every decision was measured not by what it did to her, but by what it preserved for them. Even her silence about Michael's betrayal was less about fear of loneliness and more about fear of breaking the picture of stability she had painted for her children. Yet the picture was already cracking. The midnight message had been proof, and she knew, though she did not want to admit it, that no amount of sacrifice would hold the image forever. Still, tomorrow morning, she would wake before dawn. She would tie her shoes, thread her needles, and stitch someone else's fabric while her own life unraveled. Because that was what mothers like her did. They bore the weight quietly until the weight became unbearable. Linda turned her head toward the man sleeping beside her, his hand curled loosely on the pillow. She felt no comfort in his presence, only the hollow ache of distance. And in that moment, she wondered if perhaps she was not saving her children at all, but only postponing the hurt. Her eyes closed. A single thought drifted across her mind before sleep claimed her. How much longer can I carry this alone? The following Saturday, Linda's younger sister, Sarah, arrived at the house unannounced. She carried a bag of groceries in her arms and the determined expression of a woman who had long grown tired of watching her sister bleed in silence. "I thought I'd cook for you today," Sarah said, brushing past Michael's empty shoes in the hallway. He was gone again, something about an out-of-town client. Linda didn't ask anymore. The kitchen filled with the sound of paper bags rustling, Sarah pulling out chicken breasts, a bundle of asparagus, and a pie from the bakery downtown. She moved quickly like someone who had planned this intervention down to the dessert. Linda trailed behind her, smoothing her apron. You didn't have to. I wanted to. Sarah cut in, setting a skillet on the stove. Her tone left no room for argument. The sisters were only 3 years apart, but life had carved them into different shapes. Sarah had never married, never had children. She poured her energy into teaching high school literature, into volunteering at shelters, into traveling on summers when she could afford it. She was leaner than Linda, her hair cropped short, her eyes sharp with a clarity Linda sometimes envied. For years, Sarah had been the one asking questions Linda didn't want to answer. Today was no different. Danny told me you've been working extra shifts, Sarah said, rinsing asparagus under the tap. At your age, Linda, and after all you've already given, why? Linda took a breath, folding a dish towel in her hands. Daniel's tuition, and Emily still has those loans. They need me. They need you alive, Sarah shot back. Not exhausted, not breaking yourself for a man who's supposed to be providing for this family. The words landed like a slap, even though Sarah's voice was calm. Don't, Linda whispered. Not here, not like this. Sarah turned, water dripping from her hands, her gaze unflinching. You think by keeping quiet you're saving them, but you're not. You're teaching them that silence is love, that endurance is the same as devotion. Linda pressed the towel tighter as if it might hold her together. It is love, they need stability. What they need is the truth, Sarah replied. They need to see their mother value herself. Otherwise, what are you showing them? That betrayal is tolerable as long as the bills get paid. The kitchen grew heavy with the sound of the skillet warming on the stove. The oil shimmered. The air seemed to hold its breath. Linda wanted to argue. She wanted to defend Michael, to explain that she was protecting her children, not enabling her husband. But the words tangled inside her, each one unraveling before it reached her mouth. Finally, she said, almost pleading, "They're happy, Sarah. Can't that be enough?" Sarah shook her head slowly. They're not happy. They're blind. And one day the blindfold will fall. Then what? They'll ask you why you let them believe in a lie. And what will you say? The question pierced deeper than Linda expected. She turned to the window above the sink, where the bare branches of the maple tree scraped against the winter sky. Daniel was inside his room upstairs. Emily was working a weekend shift downtown. Both believed their father was simply busy. Both still carried unbroken pictures of family in their minds. How long could she protect those pictures before they shattered anyway? Sarah touched her shoulder gently. Linda, I love you. You've carried this family for decades, but carrying is not the same as living. One day you will collapse under the weight, and then what will happen to them? To you? Linda swallowed hard. The kitchen felt smaller than it had minutes ago. I can't, she whispered. I can't be the one who ruins everything. Sarah's eyes softened. You're not the one ruining anything. He is. The skillet hissed as Sarah placed the chicken in. The sound filled the silence between them, a sharp, angry sear that matched the burn behind Linda's ribs. They ate together an hour later at the small kitchen table. Daniel came down briefly, grabbed a plate, and retreated upstairs again with a distracted smile. Michael's chair was empty, as it often was. Sarah watched her sister cut her food into small, careful bites. Linda, she said quietly, don't mistake survival for peace. Linda looked at her plate, unable to meet her sister's gaze, because deep down she knew Sarah was right, but knowing and acting were different things, and Linda wasn't ready yet. When Sarah left that evening, the kitchen felt cavernous. Linda stood at the sink, washing dishes that didn't need washing, her sister's words echoing in the space Michael should have filled. And for the first time, she wondered if silence might be its own kind of betrayal. Thanksgiving had always been Linda's favorite holiday. No gifts to buy, no expectations of glittering lights or perfect trees. Just food, family, and the fragile peace of gathering around a table. She had clung to that ritual for years, convincing herself that as long as Thanksgiving remained intact, so did her family. This year, the dining room table gleamed beneath her mother's china, the set with faint blue flowers Linda had inherited after her parents passed. Emily arrived first, carrying a pie she'd picked up from the bakery. Daniel came next, shoulders stooped under the weight of his backpack, as though he couldn't separate school from life. They set the dishes out together, their voices warm, their laughter spilling into the corners of the house, but one chair remained empty. Michael had texted earlier, running late, don't wait for me. Linda read the words twice, then set the phone face down beside the napkins. She told the children nothing. She poured wine, lit the candles, smiled as if everything were as it should be. They tried, the three of them, to fill the silence. Emily told a story about a case she'd nearly lost but managed to turn in her favor. Daniel described his final project, how his professor said his design showed real promise. Linda nodded, asked questions, laughed at the right times, but her eyes kept drifting to the chair beside her. It wasn't just empty, it was accusatory. At one point, Emily leaned closer. "Mom," she said softly, "is Dad okay?" Linda's fork paused over her plate. "Of course, just busy." Emily's expression tightened, but she let it go. Daniel said nothing, too busy scrolling through his phone between bites. The turkey grew cold. The green beans lost their shine. By 6 o'clock, Linda knew they could not stall any longer. She asked Emily to carve the pie, even though it was usually Michael's job. The absence screamed louder than any argument. Later, after the dishes were cleared and Daniel disappeared upstairs, Emily lingered in the kitchen, helping her mother pack leftovers into foil containers. "Mom," she said, stacking the plates with deliberate care, "I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it feels like you're carrying this whole thing by yourself." Linda kept her hands busy, smoothing the foil over the mashed potatoes. "That's what mothers do." Emily's eyes searched her face. "Mothers don't have to do it alone." Linda smiled faintly. "Go rest, sweetheart, you've worked hard." But when Emily finally left, the smile fell. Linda stood at the sink, staring at her reflection in the dark window, Sarah's warning echoing in her ears, "Don't mistake survival for peace." Behind her, the dining table sat with its one empty chair. It seemed to glow in the candlelight, a silent witness, a symbol of what her children were beginning to see for themselves. And Linda knew with a cold certainty that the story she had fought so hard to preserve was unraveling, right there, in front of the people she most wanted to protect. The Saturday after Thanksgiving, the house was quiet except for the scratching of Daniel's pencil upstairs. Linda was folding laundry in the living room, smoothing each shirt with practiced hands when she heard his voice call from above. "Mom." It wasn't the casual, distracted tone he usually used when asking for snacks or help finding socks. It was sharper, shaken. She climbed the stairs slowly, arms full of towels, and found Daniel sitting on his bed with his phone in hand. His face was pale, his eyes wide in the way they had been when he was a little boy waking from nightmares. "Look," he whispered, holding the screen toward her. On it, an Instagram post glowed. A woman, Rebecca, though Linda had never spoken her name aloud, smiling at a restaurant table. Her hand rested over another hand, familiar and unmistakable. Michael's wedding band caught the light, gleaming like betrayal itself. The caption read, "When you find happiness in unexpected places." Linda's throat closed. The towels slipped from her arms, spilling onto the floor like discarded evidence. "Is that?" Daniel's voice broke. Linda pressed her lips together, searching for a lie that might soften the truth. But the ring, the hand, the intimacy of that photograph, there was no lie that could hold. "Yes," she said finally, her voice almost inaudible. Daniel stared at the phone. How long? Her instinct screamed to protect him, to shield him from the length of her silence. But the weight of Sarah's words, the weight of the empty chair at Thanksgiving, pressed against her chest. She could not keep pretending. "A while," she admitted. Daniel stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "And you knew and you didn't say anything?" Tears pricked her eyes. "I was trying to protect you and Emily." "Protect us from what, Mom?" His voice cracked with anger. "From the truth. From knowing Dad's a liar? You think keeping this secret made it better?" Linda reached out, but he stepped back. "I'm not a kid anymore," Daniel said, his fists clenched at his sides. "You should have told me." The words pierced her deeper than the picture ever could, because she realized in that moment her silence hadn't shielded him, it had betrayed him in its own way. Daniel sank onto the edge of his bed, his head in his hands. He looked smaller than he had in years, as if the weight of discovery had shrunk him back into boyhood. Linda sat beside him, leaving a careful space between them. She wanted to wrap her arms around him, but she knew comfort was not what he wanted. "I thought if I kept it quiet, maybe I could hold us together," she whispered. He lifted his head, eyes red. "You can't hold together something that's already falling apart." The truth of it rang in the air, unshakable. Downstairs, the laundry lay scattered on the floor, forgotten. In Daniel's room, silence stretched between mother and son, heavy with things neither of them could undo. Linda felt the world shift again, another fracture opening wide. Her children now knew what she had tried so hard to hide, and in the rawness of Daniel's voice, she heard the future, a family no longer bound by illusions. That night, Linda sat alone in the kitchen after Daniel had shut himself away in his room. The refrigerator hummed softly, the clock ticked past midnight, and the shadows of the maple branches tapped against the window as if demanding she make a choice. On the table before her lay the folded towels she had gathered earlier, still warm from the dryer. She picked one up, smoothed it flat, then folded it once, twice, pressing the edges as if order in fabric could restore order in her life. But no neat corner could hide the fact that her son had seen with his own eyes what she had spent months denying. The words replayed in her head, "You can't hold together something that's already falling apart." For decades, her life had been built on holding children through sickness and heartbreak, holding finances together when Michael's ventures crumbled, holding her tongue when silence was easier than confrontation. She had carried everyone else's burdens as though it were her sacred duty. But now, carrying felt less like devotion and more like drowning. The kitchen door creaked open. Emily stepped inside, her coat still draped over her shoulders, hair damp from the mist outside. She had come straight from the office, working late as usual, but her eyes flicked immediately to her mother's face. "Mom," Emily said softly. "Danny called me." Linda's breath caught. Emily dropped her bag on the chair and sat across from her. "He's upset, and I don't blame him." There was no accusation in her voice yet, only concern, but Linda felt the sting anyway. "I was trying to protect you," Linda whispered. Emily leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly together. "Protect us from what? We're not children anymore. Do you really think we can't handle the truth?" Linda's eyes filled. "I thought if I could just keep things steady, if I could bear it quietly, maybe you'd still have your father the way you remembered him." Emily shook her head, a sad smile crossing her face. "Mom, we don't need him perfect. We just need you honest. That's all we've ever needed." The words landed heavier than Linda expected. She had been so focused on shielding her children from pain that she had forgotten the deeper truth. Children don't require perfection, they require authenticity. Emily reached across the table, laying her hand over her mother's. "You've given us everything. You don't have to keep sacrificing yourself to hold up a lie." Linda's tears spilled freely now, hot against her cheeks. "If I tell you everything, if I confront him, it will break this family apart." Emily's voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "Mom, it's already broken. The only thing left is whether you'll let us walk through the truth with you, or whether you'll keep carrying it alone until it crushes you." Silence filled the kitchen. The maple branches tapped again at the window, like a metronome counting down to decision. For the first time, Linda allowed herself to imagine another way. A life not bound by protecting Michael, not trapped by his secrets, not silenced by fear of what the children might think. A life where truth, though painful, could free her from the endless burden of sacrifice. Her hands trembled as she squeezed Emily's. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Emily's grip tightened. "You don't have to be strong alone. That's the point." In the upstairs hallway, Linda heard Daniel's door close softly, his footsteps heading toward his room again. He had been listening. The weight in her chest shifted, not gone, but shared. And for the first time in years, Linda felt something she had forgotten she could feel: choice. The crossroads lay before her. Continue the silence or step into the storm. And though the storm terrified her, she understood what she had never admitted before. Silence was no longer love. Silence was betrayal. The rain came hard that Tuesday night, hammering against the windows as if the sky itself had grown impatient with her silence. The gutters overflowed, water rushing down the street in silver rivers. Linda sat on the couch in her robe, the lamp casting a soft pool of light across the living room. Daniel was upstairs, headphones on, pretending to study. Emily had returned to her apartment after their late-night conversation, but Linda felt her daughter's words echoing still. "You don't have to be strong alone." The front door opened just after 10. Michael stepped in, shaking rain from his shoulders, his tie loosened, his shoes muddy. He looked tired, but not the tired of honest work. rather the disheveled weariness of a man caught between lies. Rough night, he muttered, setting down his briefcase. He reached for the remote as though the television could fill the silence. Linda stood. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought he might hear it. Michael, we need to talk. He froze, remote in hand, then set it down carefully. What about? Her voice shook, but she forced it steady. Rebecca. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to hush. His head turned slowly, eyes narrowing. What did you say? Don't play dumb. Her hands clenched at her sides. Daniel saw the picture. The whole world saw it, you with her. Michael's jaw tightened. He looked toward the hallway as if to be sure Daniel wasn't there. Linda? No, she cut him off, the word sharper than she expected. Don't give me another excuse. No more late-night meetings, no more dinners with clients, no more lies. He took a step forward, his voice dropping to a pleading tone. It wasn't serious. It was a mistake. Her laugh cracked like glass. A mistake, Michael. Mistakes are forgetting an anniversary or saying something cruel in anger. What you've done is a choice, again and again, months of choices. He rubbed his forehead, pacing. I was under pressure. I felt unappreciated, invisible. The words stung, but they also enraged her. Invisible? She repeated, her voice trembling. Do you know how many nights I worked extra shifts so Daniel could finish school? How many mornings I woke before dawn to keep this family afloat? You were never invisible, Michael. You were protected by me. Lightning flashed, illuminating the lines of exhaustion on her face. For once, he had no quick reply. Linda stepped closer, her breath shaking. I carried this family on my back while you chased someone else's attention. I told myself it was for the children, but I see now I was protecting your image, not them. His shoulders sagged. So what now? Her answer came quiet but certain. Now I stop protecting you. Michael's eyes widened as though he hadn't expected the woman before him, the one who had kept the peace for decades, to finally put down her burden. You'll ruin everything, he whispered. No, Linda said, her voice steady at last. You already did, I'm just done pretending otherwise. Thunder rolled above them, shaking the windows. Daniel's door creaked at the top of the stairs. He had heard. Linda didn't flinch. She turned back to Michael, her words final. From this night on, the silence ends, and for the first time in years, she felt the weight lift, not gone, but shared, honest, real. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, Linda stood taller. Her voice no longer hidden. The storm lingered into morning, leaving puddles like small mirrors along the sidewalk. Linda moved through the kitchen slowly, her body heavy from a sleepless night. The house smelled faintly of damp earth and brewed coffee. Daniel sat at the table, arms crossed, a wall of silence between them. His eyes were ringed with fatigue, but they carried something sharper than exhaustion, disappointment. She placed a mug before him. He didn't touch it. Emily's coming over, Linda said quietly. Daniel didn't look up. Good. At 10 o'clock, Emily arrived, still in her office clothes, her heels clicking across the floor. Her face was tight, her jaw set. She had already spoken with Daniel on the phone, Linda could tell. There would be no easing into this conversation. They sat at the kitchen table, the three of them, while Michael remained upstairs, pretending to sleep off the night. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the clock on the wall, each tick pulling Linda closer to the truth she had avoided. Finally, Emily broke the silence. Tell us everything, Mom. Linda's throat tightened. She had thought of this moment for weeks, months even, but imagining it had not prepared her for the weight of her children's expectant faces. She folded her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. I've known, she began. Her voice cracked, but she forced it steady. I've known about your father and Rebecca, longer than I want to admit. Daniel's head snapped up. Emily's eyes filled, though no tears fell yet. I kept quiet because I thought I was protecting you, Linda continued. I thought if I could carry the burden myself, maybe you wouldn't have to lose the father you believed in. Emily leaned forward, her voice sharp. But we lost him anyway. Linda's tears slipped down her cheeks. I see that now, and I'm sorry, I was wrong. The room grew still. Daniel's hands tightened into fists against the table. His voice was low, breaking at the edges. So all those nights, the excuses, the empty chair at Thanksgiving, you knew, and you just let us think everything was normal? Linda reached for him, but he pulled back. I thought I was sparing you, she whispered. Emily's composure finally cracked. A tear slid down her cheek, followed by another. You weren't sparing us, Mom. You were sparing him. The truth of it cut deeper than Linda could bear. She pressed her palms against the wood grain of the table, steadying herself. You're right, I was afraid of what would happen if the truth tore us apart, but holding it alone was tearing me apart instead. For the first time, her children saw her not just as their mother, but as a woman, fallible, frightened, human. Emily reached for Linda's hand across the table. We don't need perfection. We don't even need Dad to be perfect. We just need you to be honest with us. We need to face this together. Linda let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Slowly, Daniel lifted his gaze, his jaw still tense but his eyes softer. I don't know if I can forgive him, he said, but I don't want you carrying this alone anymore. The weight shifted in that moment, not lifted entirely but spread across 3 hearts instead of one. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked, a reminder that Michael still existed in their home, hovering at the edge of the truth he had created. But here, at the kitchen table, a different family was forming, one bound not by illusion but by honesty. For the first time, Linda felt less like she was shielding her children from pain and more like she was standing with them inside it. The silence had broken, and though it hurt, it also healed. The days after their conversation passed like slow tides, heavy, then still, then heavy again. The truth had not solved everything. It never does, but it had cleared the fog. At least now the 3 of them were breathing the same air. Michael stayed in the house, though his presence felt more like furniture than family. He moved around them quietly, avoiding questions, burying himself in the newspaper or late-night drives. Linda no longer filled the silence for him. She let it hang. For once, the weight was his to carry. One Saturday morning, Linda woke before dawn and dressed in her work clothes. She hadn't told Daniel or Emily she had picked up extra hours at the alterations shop again. Old habits die hard. She tied her shoes, slipped her sewing kit into her bag, and started for the door. Daniel appeared at the bottom of the stairs, hair messy, t-shirt wrinkled. Where are you going? Work, she answered simply. At 6 a.m., his eyebrows rose. Mom, you don't have to kill yourself to keep this place running. She hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Someone has to. No, Daniel said firmly. He came down the last step and stood in front of her. Not someone, not just you, will help. The words were so earnest, so unshaken, that Linda's chest ached. For years, she had been the only one carrying. She had forgotten what it felt like to be offered hands instead of demands. Later that afternoon, Emily arrived with groceries, bags heavier than her mother would ever buy. Fresh fruit, a roast, even flowers. She set them on the counter, dusting off her hands. I figured you wouldn't spend money on these things for yourself, Emily said. So I did. Linda stared at the bouquet of yellow tulips. For a moment, she saw her mother's hands folding napkins at Thanksgiving, saw her sister Sarah's sharp gaze across the kitchen table, saw every act of caretaking that had shaped her. And now here was her daughter bringing her flowers. The circle shifted. The care moved both ways. That evening, the 3 of them ate together without Michael. His chair remained empty as it had on so many nights. But this time, Emily pulled it away from the table altogether. She placed the vase of tulips in its place. There, she said with a small smile. Better. Daniel chuckled, tension softening in his shoulders. Linda looked at the flowers, bright, unapologetic yellow, and something inside her broke open. Not in grief, but in relief. For years she had dreaded the sight of an empty chair. Tonight, that space was no longer a wound. It was a choice, a statement. After dinner, while Emily washed dishes and Daniel dried, Linda sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. She listened to their voices drifting around her, arguing over the best way to stack plates, laughing at an old memory of Daniel spilling soda all over Emily's homework. For the first time in months, the house felt alive. She thought of Sarah's warning, don't mistake survival for peace. Now she understood. Survival had been working herself to the bone, patching holes, carrying silence. Peace was different. Peace was tulips in a vase where lies used to sit. Peace was laughter without pretending. Peace was her children looking at her and seeing not just their mother, but a woman worth standing beside. When she rose to pour more tea, she caught her reflection in the window. The lines on her face were still there, carved by years of sacrifice. But her eyes looked different. Not healed, not yet, but awake. And for the first time in a long while, Linda felt something stirring beneath the weariness. A beginning. Spring came quietly, with blossoms bursting along the sidewalks and soft breezes carrying the smell of cut grass. Linda had always marked the seasons by her children's milestones. Emily's first day of law school in autumn, Daniel's high school graduation in June. Now, at 56, she found herself preparing for another, Daniel's college graduation. The morning of the ceremony, Linda stood in front of the mirror in a simple navy dress. Her hands smoothed the fabric automatically, but her reflection caught her attention. There was gray in her hair, lines deepened around her mouth, yet her posture was straighter than it had been in years. There was no mask, no need to pretend. Emily arrived to pick her up, resplendent in a cream-colored suit, her smile bright and certain. "Mom," she said, adjusting Linda's necklace, "you look beautiful." Linda touched her daughter's hand. "So do you?" At the arena, families filled the seats, faces eager, balloons bobbing above heads. When Daniel's name was called, Linda's heart swelled until she thought it might burst. He strode across the stage, cap slightly askew, tassel brushing his cheek. He shook the dean's hand, lifted his diploma high, and glanced into the crowd until his eyes found hers. He grinned, the same grin he'd had as a boy, holding up a finger paint masterpiece. Linda clapped, tears streaming freely. Emily's arm around her shoulders. For years, she had feared her silence would rob her children of a foundation. But now, watching her son, she understood they had not been built on Michael's image. They had been built on her sacrifices, on her love. On the countless nights she stayed awake stitching seams no one else saw. After the ceremony, the three of them gathered outside under the bright May sky. Daniel wrapped his arms around his mother and sister at once. "We did it," he laughed, "all of us." Linda felt the warmth of his embrace, Emily's steady presence at her side, the sunlight spilling across their faces. For the first time in decades, she believed in a future that was hers, not borrowed, not hidden, not carried in silence. Michael was nowhere in sight. She didn't look for him. His absence no longer wounded her, it freed her. That night, back at home, the tulips on the table had begun to fade, petals curling at the edges. Linda replaced them with fresh ones, yellow and bright. She set the vase in the center, where once an empty chair had accused her. Now the space spoke of possibility, of renewal. She sat at the table with her children, raising her glass of sparkling cider. "To us," she said, "to honesty, to strength, and to choosing peace over silence." They clinked glasses, and in that small, ordinary gesture, Linda felt something extraordinary. She was no longer surviving. She was living. Dear reader, thank you for walking with Linda's story through silence, sacrifice, heartbreak, and healing. Stories like this remind us that families are not perfect, but love can still survive imperfection when it is honest and true. I wish you and your loved ones health, peace, and happiness. May your own family table always be filled not with silence, but with laughter and care. With gratitude, the author.